In a world drowning in data, open source intelligence is the difference between noise and insight. I'm Jake Krebs, and this is the OSINT Podcast, unpacking the tools, tactics, and techniques that matter to the OSINT community. Whether you're tracking threats, analyzing platforms, or just trying to separate signal from noise, this is your go-to resource for all things open source intelligence. Let's get started. Hey everyone, and welcome to the 13th episode of the OSINT Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Krebs. In today's episode, we're going to be covering issue number 95 and number 96 of the OSINT newsletter. If you haven't already subscribed, go ahead and head on over to osintnewsletter.com. Subscribing is free. There is an option to upgrade to a paid subscription, but it's not required. There's plenty of free content available for everybody. The main topics that we're going to be covering in today's episode is going to be geolocation and some of the content that we feature in the free issue of the OSINT newsletter, issue number 95, as well as organizing information and avoiding duplication of effort, which is a topic that I discuss in issue number 96 of the newsletter. If you want to follow along, go ahead and head on over to osintnewsletter.com/95 for the free issue about geolocation, and then pivot on over to osintnewsletter.com/96 if you want to follow along with the paid issue that includes 3 topics from OSINT News, 3 new tools for OSINT, as well as the paid content, which once again is organizing information and avoiding duplication of effort. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. But if you haven't already, go ahead and head on over to our socials, Twitter or X, LinkedIn, subscribe there or follow there. We post a lot of updates, including videos of some of the tools that we cover. So go ahead and check that out. But now let's go ahead and get started with today's episode. Let's go ahead and jump right into the free issue. Once again, this is osintnewsletter.com/95. This one is about geolocation, and it's actually a really good episode or issue for beginners and intermediate investigators alike. Topics that we cover include the basics of geospatial or GEOINT, geospatial intelligence or GEOINT, some of the best geolocation tools that are online, but we don't exclusively just talk about tools. We also talk about manual methods, including visual recognition, and how to sort of piece all of these things together in a geographical context. So I won't go over all of the details in the free issue because it is free for everybody, but I wanted to give everybody sort of a high-level overview of what this issue is going to cover and why it is important. The first thing that we mention in this issue is visual analysis. And this is sort of being able to look at video footage that are full of clues, even minor details like curb paint, or let's say street signs, or let's say like housing numbers that might be on houses, for example, or license plates. These are types of things that you might be able to collect from a visual perspective and be able to identify them very quickly if you're very trained. But there are also a variety of other tools that you can use or references that you can look upon to be able to make sense or be able to understand that context a little bit better when it comes into the overall view of your investigation. Then it also talks about digital analysis and how you can do things like IP geolocation, which is sometimes not always super relevant because the information that you get from an IP geolocation is usually not very high fidelity because there's a variety of other ways to spoof that. For example, you could use a VPN, you could have a IP address that points to Sweden, but you live in New Mexico or something like that. So it's not something that you should really rely on. However, there is a variety of information when you look at residential IPs, for example. Let's say you find IP addresses that are in leaked or breach accounts, for example, that might be associated to a specific address. You might be able to use that IP information from a historical context if that is relevant. The next thing that we look at is mapping and satellite platforms. So we step through all the different available platforms that are sort of open source, things like Google Earth and Google Maps, Google Street View, and a variety of other search engines that offer these as well, like Yandex Maps, Bing Maps. One of the things we don't cover is some of these more premium tools. I've used things as premium as, let's say, Maxar for some of their satellite imagery. There's a variety of other different satellite providers that will give you free access to some satellite information for visual investigations, for example. So these are always sort of the staple for geospatial intelligence or being able to do any type of GEOINT work. The next thing we cover as well is, in addition to having the satellite imagery that will be helpful from just a general situational awareness and context perspective, we also mention reverse image searching. Traditional image searching like Google Lens, for example, TinEye, Yandex, a variety of other search engines that sort of index images across the web. And then whenever you input an image, if it's close enough of a match to something that's already in their database, they will give you either a full match or a partial match. Another thing that you can use is AI-assisted geolocation, but I want to say proceed with caution. There are some very good enterprise tools like GeoSpy, for example. There are some more accessible tools like Picarta.ai, for example, but you always want to take this with a grain of salt. Always trust but verify. Remember that a lot of these LLM-generated geospatial intelligence tools want to please you. They want to give you the right answer. Like I said, GeoSpy is very impressive. I've seen a lot of their marketing material. I've used their tool in the past before it became sort of law enforcement only. That one's very, very impressive. But some of these other ones, I would say, proceed with caution. I would say definitely proceed with caution if you're going to be using just chatbots like ChatGPT or Grok or Gemini or things like that, because they will never tell you they do not know the answer. They will just obfuscate the truth for as long as you're willing to chat and continue to spend tokens. The next thing that's talked about is metadata viewers. This is something that if you're looking at really old imagery, for example, you can pull out EXIF metadata from specific images. That's sort of gone on the wayside. A lot of times by the time you actually upload it to a server on a website like Flickr or X or Facebook or whatever, all that EXIF data is scrubbed. However, there's also sometimes some relevant information that could be helpful for you. For example, you might be able to tell that an iPhone took a particular image, and now you know the device that a person might have. For example, it may not be specifically related to geolocation-based data, but there's some goodness that can still be found in EXIF metadata if you know where to look. This is usually going to be helpful if you have like local access to information. For example, you find a flash drive that's full of images and those haven't been uploaded yet to a server. They may contain EXIF metadata if you're looking from like a digital forensics perspective. The last thing that we mention are specialist tools. And these are some of the things that I've mentioned in previous issues of the newsletter and episodes of the podcast. Things like sun position calculators to figure out, okay, we can see sort of the shadows that are casting on specific objects in an image. We know roughly where this was taken. Now we can not only figure out where it was taken or maybe get a more precise location of where it's taken, but we can also figure out the time of day or maybe the time of year, the date that it was taken as well. This is also, in collaboration with tools like shadow maps that I mentioned in a previous issue, where you can kind of combine all of these tools together. You have satellite imagery, you have specific metadata investigation tools. You may be able to use IP geolocation. You might be able to just use a variety of other out-of-box tools to be able to piece together sort of a list of workflows that you can use if you get a specific piece of information and you want to investigate further. The rest of the article is very detailed, so it's going to be difficult to sort of zoom over at a high level. But there's a section called Spot the Details, Manual Methods, and Visual Recognition. I definitely consider checking that one out. There's a variety of other different things that it covers, like architectural analysis, road and transport indicators, some of the things I mentioned before, like the traffic lights are different in different countries. They have different signs. They maybe drive on a different side of the road. It goes on to talk about language and typography. Sometimes very nuanced changes in specific languages will be able to give you a differentiator of where this is at. So for example, like Cyrillic-based languages, there might be a slight deviation between one speaker of Russian and another, and you might be able to see street signs that are specific deviations of a specific word that is only used in a particular country. This is something that's happened to me in the past. So it's definitely something you want to get more familiar with. You don't have to be fluent in a foreign language. You just have to be able to recognize, I'm seeing something that I know could potentially be an indicator of more useful information. Now I need to go look into it further and use the tools that are available at my disposal. The next thing it's talking about is vegetation and ecology. Certain plants and trees are only available in certain parts of the world. There's very specific ones that are iconic, for example, that can definitely help you pinpoint that you're in one part of the world or another. This is something that you see often with GeoGuessr players online. They're able to just look at a tree and say, okay, I know that's in Africa, it has to be, or something like that. So definitely something worth training your brain on. The list goes on, talks about shadow and sun analysis, which I kind of touched on earlier, and terrain and topography. The last part of this issue talks about a specific case study, geolocation, OSINT in action. There is a 4-step process that goes from reviewing available footage, reverse image search, pivoting over to street view, and then getting into the technical details. So if you are new to geolocation, geospatial intelligence in general, definitely give this one a read. It's very detailed, and I really like the way that it turned out. Go ahead and follow along at osintnewsletter.com/95. That brings us to the next issue of the OSINT newsletter, issue number 96. Again, this one's main topic is organizing information and avoiding duplication of effort. Sounds very basic, but I'm going to go into some pretty technical details later on. But if you want to follow along, once again, it's osintnewsletter.com/96. Now, the first thing that we mention in the OSINT news section is an article written by Craig Silverman in the digital digging publication that is created by Hank Von S, but it's also in Craig's publication indicator. It's titled The State of Online Search, How to Find What You're Looking For in the Age of AI. I encourage you to read it because it's very insightful, but at a very high level overview, a lot of the search methods that we were raised on in our career for being able to find information online, like search operators in a text-based search engine, seemingly are going away. What does that mean? They are replacing a lot of different functionality for search with AI first modes. You've kind of seen this with Google's AI mode. Now they're starting to integrate some of these into YouTube search functionality. So something that used to be like site : a domain in text, you want a specific piece of text. These types of things that we started learning in like our library classes as kids, but then grew up later to implement some of these things into our workflows for open source intelligence are seemingly going away. And we need to be able to adapt to this new market and be able to find the best ways to be able to search for information online. So I suspect in the future, there's going to be specific types of ways to prompt AI to get specific types of answers. And it's up to us to figure out what these things are and to make sure that we do not become obsolete as investigators because of all the techniques that we've learned going away. So go ahead and check that one out. It is the first issue in the OSINT news section of issue number 96 of the OSINT newsletter. The next issue, or the next news topic, is published by Bellingcat by an author named Trevor Ball, and it is titled Identifying Less Lethal Weapons Used by DHS Agents in U.S. Immigration Raids and Protests. Now, I know I've been kind of talking a lot about this U.S. immigration raids and protest stuff in a couple different issues. I hope it does not come off as partisan in any way. There's just been really good work put out by Bellingcat specifically on investigating some of these topics. And this one in particular is talking about visual recognition, which is something I mentioned earlier in the podcast about being able to train your brain to see specific information that's going to be useful for you. So you don't have to always go back to a reference manual or always go back to a tool. It's just going to be in your head. And this one in particular is using visual recognition to identify less lethal weapons. And what does that mean? These are things like the beanbag guns. You're looking at pepper balls. You're looking at paintball guns, things like different types of weapons that are used by law enforcement to not have fatal damage on individuals, but be able to produce enough force to be able to push back a crowd or have some sort of presence of force. These are things that are showing up more and more, and we're able to get a lot of information because of social media to be able to identify those when they're happening. So if you come across video or photo evidence and you see a weapon that is used and it looks exactly like a lethal firearm, like an AR-15 or other types of military style issued firearms, it may actually just be a paintball gun that looks exactly like one, or an airsoft gun or a beanbag gun or a pepper ball, whatever you want to call them. They look very combat-like, and I think it's primarily from an aesthetic purpose. For some of these people that are hobbyists, for example, they want to use paintball guns, whatever. I know that when I was younger, we used to do a lot of forest ball, paintball matches, and a lot of the paintball guns, even back then, were very similar to military issue style weapons, just from an aesthetic standpoint. So it's important to be able to identify these, not to be able to hunt and look for them, but also be able to differentiate them between a normal, lead firearm type of lethal weapon versus a less than lethal weapon, which is often being seen in social media posts online throughout the US and across the world. So definitely check that one out. It is the second topic in the news section of the OSINT newsletter. Now, the last thing that I wanted to talk about, and this is something I'm just going to keep talking about until it goes away, is this OpenClaw Moltbot thing. And the reason why I think it's so significant is I think that it is, and I've said this in a previous podcast, it is going to be one of the new indicators or identifiers that we're going to have to investigate to be able to see behind the curtain on who's operating some of these agentic AIs. And this one is titled, "The number one downloaded skill on OpenClaw was malware." And if you aren't familiar with how all this is going on, essentially there are skills that you can train your agentic AIs to be able to perform specific tasks. And these AIs have access all the way to the operating system level of your device. So a lot of these skills, they're marketed as one thing, for example, and then when you download them and execute them, they actually have access to your whole operating system. They're installing keyloggers, they're installing a variety of different malware that is causing harm to the people that are operating these agentic AIs. And now I want you to think about something, is that if you have young people in the household that are interested in technology and they're goofing around with some of these agents, and they install some of these skills and they deploy some of these agents, and those skills end up containing malware, you can infect and compromise pretty much any device that's on that network depending on what that malware is doing. So you may have your teenage son or daughter or a nephew or something like that that's in your house that's doing something on a network, or they could be in a public space, for example, and they could potentially be compromising multiple devices that are on a network. So this is something that I think is important to keep our finger on the pulse of, because I very much feel like this Moltbot discovery thing is like the MySpace of LLMs. It's really important and significant right now, but it's going to pave the way for what's going to be a more sophisticated version later. Think your Facebooks, your LinkedIns, your Twitters, etc. The next thing that's coming is going to be a lot more sophisticated, and I think now is the time for us to be familiar with what's going on here, identify the problems of what's happening, and most importantly, understanding the underlying technology so that when it's our time to begin an investigation of what's going on, we already have the prerequisite knowledge of what's happening, and we don't have to go back and try to learn what's agentic AI, what are the different models that are available, what type of access do these devices have on a local network, for example. We already have all of that prerequisite information, and now we just have to begin our investigations with that information in mind. So definitely check that out. That is the third post. This is specifically something that I found from a post on X. It was like a long thread about what's going on with Moltbot, OpenClaw, etc. So definitely give that one a look. This takes us straight into the OSINT tools section of issue number 96. We're going to kick things off with a tool called OSINT Entity Extractor. What this is, it's an Obsidian plugin that allows you to take your open API key and extract information specifically from any of the content that you have online easily. So think about like names and images and locations and things like that. Instead of having to scan through all of this documentation and pull out all of the things you're interested in, you can just plug the URL into this plugin on Obsidian, and it'll pull all that information out for you and create a nice visualization of all the key data points. If you aren't familiar, Obsidian is an open source sort of note-taking, knowledge-based thing that you can install for free. And they have community plugins that allow either you to download somebody else's plugin or create a plugin of your own and add it to your Obsidian library. Now, this is something I'll talk about later on in the issue. I created one of these for the paid content of this newsletter. But this is something that's really cool. Instead of having to have this massive enterprise tool that's going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars or more per year, you can just get Obsidian for free. You can find all these community and plugins. You can get them installed and put into Obsidian, and then you can use that tool as sort of your mothership for all of your investigations. This is one of these tools that you can easily integrate and start getting a value from it immediately. And specifically from the context of it being free, if you are a private investigation firm, for example, no cost. If you are a small intel shop and you don't have a big budget, no problem. You just got to get IT permission to get Obsidian on your local machine, and everything is local, which is what I really like about Obsidian, is it gives you the option to store everything specific on your device. There's no need to have cloud storage or any type of security risk that way. So definitely give this a shot. It's OSINT Entity Extractor. It is a plugin that is published on GitHub. and you can easily integrate it into Obsidian if you already have it. The next thing on the list is called P3 Wi-Fi. If you've ever used Wiggle, which is a tool that's been around forever, P3 Wi-Fi is like the modern version of it. It is like 3wifi.dev, I think is the URL, but it is essentially a best-in-class database of vulnerable access points, and it's an open source project. And what that means is there's all these different wireless access points that are pretty much logged and documented. There's actually like an entire community of people out there that go and hunt for these things and database them and be able to post them online. This is one of these databases that allows you to look for things. The reason why this is important is that a lot of times this is a very niche data set. I don't want to act like this is something very mainstream that you're going to use every single day. But if you're looking for specific information that's hard to find, this is going to be a really good place to check. So I'm just going to click through it real quick and see. But there is a database that you can download. You can download the entire thing. You can search across the database for things like SSIDs, Wi-Fi keys, things like that. You can select a specific area. So if you're only investigating in like Indianapolis, for example, you can just find the available SSIDs or Wi-Fi access points that are in Indianapolis. So a lot of times you might get this information from a leak, for example. Let's say that you get like a Wi-Fi name or password or whatever from a leak, or you get it from other type of investigative methods. You can then check to see if those are available on the search engine and be able to find a more specific location for these devices, for example. So this is something if you're in the technical intelligence space or you're doing some very specific location-based investigations, you should definitely give this a shot. And if you feel like Wiggle was created in 1982 and was never updated, I agree. This one's a little bit better. I would say it's probably in the 2014 type of look and feel for the site. They have a nice visualization on the map, be able to have a pretty easy to use search engine. It just doesn't feel as modern as some of these other applications that we're seeing out there. And on the note of modern applications, one of these tools that I've used for a very long period of time is called Instant Data Scraper. And the reason why I like it is it just works, right? You download the extension, you go to a site that has tabular data, you hit the little Pokemon ball, and it starts scraping the data on the page for you. It'll paginate for you. It'll create delays in pagination if you're running into CAPTCHAs or any type of anti-scraping technology. But it hasn't been updated. There hasn't been any new features in years and years. And so with the invent of LLMs and AI that's coming into the marketplace, there's this growing need to be able to integrate AI into any aspect of your workflow. And there's this tool that I found called Thunderbit. And what it reminds me of an instant data scraper that has ChatGPT built into it, for example. So if you want to maybe transform the data during the scrape, for example, or you want to be able to customize exactly the type of information you're pulling from instead of just grabbing all the raw data and having to edit it later in a CSV or in Google Sheets or something like that, go ahead and check out Thunderbit. I think there's a paid version of it, so it's going to be a little bit of a cost. But if you find yourself using Instant Data Scraper a lot and you have a little bit of a budget to get a little bit more, then I definitely consider checking out Thunderbit. And that is the third tool in this issue of the OSINT newsletter. So that's it for the free content in the OSINT newsletter. Once again, we covered OSINT news. We talked about the state of online search and how AI search is going to be replacing some of the antiquated or legacy search-based systems that we're used to. We talked about less than lethal weapons, how to identify them, how to differentiate them from lethal weapons, and then also just keeping our finger on the pulse of what's going on with these LLM-based social networks and the impact that they're having on the internet, as well as local machines. And then moving over to the tools, we talked about OSINT Entity Extractor. We're going to talk about that more in the paid issue, where we're going to be looking at Obsidian plugins that are going to be able to do really cool things for you. And we also talked about P3 Wi-Fi, location-based, technical intelligence if you're interested, and then lastly, Thunderbit, which is instant data scraper on steroids with AI integrated. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and pivot on over to the paid section of this newsletter. It's titled Organizing Information and Avoiding Duplication of Effort. Now, this sounds very basic, and it doesn't seem like a topic that's really for the paid version of this newsletter. So to sweeten the deal a little bit, I included 2 free tools that you can access if you are a paid subscriber of the newsletter. The first one is a browser extension, which I'll talk about in a second. And then the second one is an Obsidian plugin that I use for case management to sort of kick off your case so that you have places to put your information in instead of scattering it all around your file explorer or what other type of methods that you use. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So why am I writing this? So throughout my career, I've run into many issues, and a lot of OSINT investigators have told me they have the same issue, whereas they get an intelligent requirement. They say, okay, answer this question for me. And off to the races they go. They start searching, they start gathering information, they start putting together all these types of evidence, and they quickly realize that they're sort of running in circles. And what I mentioned in this newsletter is that they're wandering in the desert and they're going in circles. They land on the same pages over and over and over again. Like, oh, I've already seen this Instagram. Oh, there it is again. 25, 30 minutes later, they run into the same thing that they've seen again. And the reality is that this is happening because you are just sort of shooting from the hip. You have no plan, you have no process, and you're just trying to pivot and pivot and pivot and pivot and pivot. And you never actually know when to quit, when to stop, when to move into other objectives, etc. You just continuously pivot forever. This is something that is, I feel like a lot of people who've done trace lab CTFs, for example, they run into this issue sort of exponentially because you have a time box, you have a certain amount of time to get all this stuff done. You don't know the information ahead of time. You get the information and off the races you go, and you sort of trip and fall over yourself over and over. So in this issue, I talk about a couple different steps that I think are important for you to understand and cover when you're thinking about a new investigation. Let's say that your leadership or somebody, a customer, a client, whatever it may be, has a question, has an objective for you. The first thing, and I'll always go back to the intelligence cycle because it's always been tried and true for me, is you need a plan and you need direction. Before you even dive into an investigation, you need to know what is the objective, what are the milestones along the way that you need to have in order to complete the objective, and what is your plan to get all of these. The reason why that's important is that if you have a plan and you have a blueprint for your process, you're not going to trip and fall and kind of go to the same sources over and over and over. You're not going to find yourself pivoting back to where you started and playing this weird game of Monopoly where you're just going in a circle and landing on the same squares over and over. So I talk about what do you really need? You need a goal, you need intelligence requirements, and you need a plan on how to achieve all of these. And that's sort of the prerequisite for this issue that I talk about. The second thing that I talk about is avoiding duplication of effort. Even if you have a plan, if you're stream of consciousness and going through the process of an investigation, you're going to trip and fall because the internet is sort of built on this concept of backlinks, right? It's kind of how search engines rank search results, is that every page you land on has a link to another page, and that page has a link to another page. And I think they call it a Wikipedia rabbit hole that you can fall into, for example. If you don't have the right things in place for you, you can quickly just pivot and pivot and pivot and pivot and end up right back where you started. So one of the things that I created to help me with this is a browser extension that I use, that I created, that will look at my search history once I turn it on, and it will begin to remove search results from my Google search for pages that I've already visited. So why is that important? Let's say you're searching for something very specific. You have all your little Google Docs, you got everything set up, you're finding very specific information, maybe only 40, 50 search results that come back, not millions. You start looking into some of these, you pivot through other websites, you don't actually go through Google search and find them, but you're pivoting through and you're looking through stuff. And then you go back to Google afterwards and you put in a new operator and you search for things. Those pages are still going to show up in your Google search results, even though you've already been to them. So the reason why I created this was as I'm searching through and doing my investigation, if I go back to Google and start searching again, I'm not going to see those same search results again. So as a process of elimination, I can actually eliminate all of the search results to the point where when I go back and do my search again, I might get 0 results because the 70 pages that came back, I've already reviewed them all. So this is one of the tools that I offer through the paid subscription of the newsletter, is being able to do that same functionality, eliminate all these things. And the best part about this is that you can turn it on, it'll begin to eliminate search results for you, and then you can turn it off. You can go back to your normal day. So this is something that's very good for a tactical investigator to implement into their workflow with the goal of avoiding duplication of effort, not landing on the same pages over and over, not getting the same ads, not getting the same pivots that you were getting. And a lot of times when you're doing a long-term investigation, you may have forgotten that you already went to that page. And so by eliminating it entirely from search results, this will help you stay a little bit more focused. The next thing on the list is organizing information efficiently. We talked about having a plan. We talked about avoiding duplication of effort. Along the way, you're collecting information, but after a while, that information can sort of become unwieldy. You have so much information, it's incredibly hard to organize and later recall for your own purposes. So one of the things that I talk about in this is how to solve that problem. And the way that you solve that problem is having a good case management tool and having that case management tool sort of baked into your planning process. So what I mean by that is you have this tool, you know how it works, you know all the features and functionality, and then as part of your planning, you can say, I'm going to fill out my case management tool to get all of this information that I need. And then when I'm done, I can then begin doing analysis, doing my intelligence reports or my investigative reports or whatever you may be doing, and then be able to pass that off to my stakeholders for review to get feedback, or my clients if this is a service that I'm providing. In this issue, I talk about how a lot of case management tools are very expensive. Like I said, tens of thousands of dollars. It's difficult for you to get an ROI on that, whether you are your independent practitioner or you work for an organization with a limited budget. So similar to what I talked about in the OSINT tools section, why won't you just use Obsidian, which is free and open source, and create your own plugin for it for case management? That's exactly what I did in this issue. I used VS Code and Copilot, and I used pretty much all of the available information that is out there for Obsidian. And I think I used Claude Opus 4.6, so the pretty heavy duty LLM that's available through Copilot. And I had to just create me a basic case management tool. I wanted to see how it could execute. Could it create a tool specifically for my use case inside of another application that is Obsidian? And it turns out it did it incredibly fast. I was able to give it my requirements. I said, hey, I want you to be able to create a new case, automatically populate all the identifiers that I need to look for. In this case, I just made it basic. It was like email, names, images, domains, locations, things like that. And I pretty much said, let it rip, see what happens. And in the first iteration, it created an Obsidian plugin. It got into Obsidian. I was able to locate it in the community plugins, which I show you how to do in this issue. And I was able to toggle it on. It didn't work as expected. It was sort of like, I guess it worked as expected, but the results in each section were not how I liked. So I went back to the LLM, and literally on the second iteration, I said, okay, everything's working, but I want you to adjust all these different areas so that one, I can visualize the data, and two, it's easier for me to organize. And in the second iteration, I kid you not, I was able to get a fully functional plugin that I was able to use out of the box with Obsidian. So what does this mean? The free plugin that I provide in this issue of the newsletter isn't going to be like enterprise ready. It's not going to solve all your problems. But what I was hoping to prove in this issue is that literally in maybe 2 to 10 attempts with an LLM and a $10 a month tool, we're talking about VS Code, which is free, and the Copilot upgrade, which is $10 a month, you could probably, quote unquote, vibe code your way into a very useful tool for case management for your organization, whether it's a small intel shop, like I said, a private practitioner, et cetera, to be able to organize your information accordingly. Better yet, if you don't want to create your own version, there's a variety of different options that are available. I mentioned OSINT Entity Extractor, that's available on GitHub. There's a variety of other ones that are available on GitHub or other open source tools as well. But I encourage you to go on back to the 77th issue of the OSINT newsletter, where I talk about using VS Code and Copilot for OSINT investigations. Learn how to use this stuff. It's going to be incredibly helpful for you in your career. And like I said, nothing's going to be more impressive than you saying, hey, I spent my lunch break building a case management tool, and now it's fully functional and ready to go. You come back from lunch and your whole team's using a new tool. So definitely something worth checking out. And that's pretty much it for this issue of this episode of the OSINT podcast. I talked about issue number 96 at the later half of this. So if you wanted to follow along here, it's osintnewsletter.com/96. If you upgrade to a paid subscription, you'll get all the stuff that I was talking about, including how to better plan your investigations. You'll get that browser extension for deduplication of effort. And you'll also be able to get that example of the Obsidian plugin that I built for staying organized throughout your investigation, which will also serve as a blueprint for creating your own tools. So definitely check that out. And thanks again for listening. That's it for this episode. If you have any feedback, definitely feel free to reach out. You know where to find us: X, LinkedIn. You can hit my email as well, jake@osint.news. If you have any ideas about the podcast, or you have any positive, negative feedback or otherwise, make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. Leave a review if it's good. If it's bad, just reach out to us. There's nothing we can do about a bad review that we can't do, from an email or something that you reach out to us. So definitely let us know. And again, make sure to follow us on socials. All these things I'm talking about, all these tools, we usually have videos. I sort of show them in action. So you want to see if this is tools right for you, just check out some of the posts we do on social, and it may click to you, say, hey, this is something that'd be really useful for me. So definitely check that out. And thanks again for listening. We'll see you again in 2 weeks for the next episode of the OSINT Podcast.